The morning Aldrich Voss told his driver to stop the car was the morning everything changed. Though he didn't know it yet. He was late. He was always late on Tuesdays because his 7 o'clock call with the Vancouver office ran long, and his driver Henk always took the wrong exit off the Gardner, and the coffee from the hotel lobby was always lukewarm by the time it reached his hands. These were the small, reliable failures of a man whose larger life had, by every measurable standard, succeeded beyond anything his father had dared to imagine. Aldrich Voss was 53 years old. He had built Voss Meridian Construction from a two-man operation in Thunder Bay into one of the most respected development firms in Ontario. He had a house in Rosedale with a kitchen that had been featured in a magazine. He had a son named Callum. No, not that name. His son's name was Reed Voss, 16 years old, good at lacrosse, better at spending money, and lately in the habit of saying things that made Aldrich go quiet in a way he hadn't gone quiet since the bad years. The bad years. That was what he called them now. 7 years ago when Serena left, or rather, when Serena was taken from him in the way that isn't spoken about at dinner parties or mentioned in the profile pieces that ran in the business section. 7 years ago, when Aldrich's younger brother Clifford had done what Clifford had always done, found the softest place in a room and pressed until something broke. He didn't like to think about the bad years on Tuesday mornings when the coffee was lukewarm and Henk had missed the exit. But then the car stopped. Not because of traffic, because Reed, sitting in the back seat beside his father and staring at his phone as he had been for the past 20 minutes, suddenly looked up and said, loudly, with the casual cruelty that teenagers sometimes deploy like a reflex, "Dad, look at that dirty kid. She's touching the car." Aldrich looked. Standing on the sidewalk beside a construction hoarding, one of his own he registered distantly, the orange Voss Meridian logo printed in the corner, was a girl. She was small for her age, which he would later learn was 11, though she looked 8. She wore a winter coat that was 2 sizes too large, and had a tear along the left shoulder that someone had repaired with electrical tape. Her hair was dark and unbrushed, and her shoes were not appropriate for March in Toronto. She was not touching the car. She was standing near it, looking at the hoarding, at the rendering of the building that would rise on that lot in 14 months. She was looking at it the way people look at things they're trying to memorize. "She's not touching the car," Aldrich said. "She was," Reed said, and looked back at his phone. The light changed. Henk began to ease forward, and Aldrich said, "Stop! Pull over!" Henk pulled over. Reed looked up again. "Dad, we're going to be late." "You're already late," Aldrich said. "You don't have class until 9. He opened the door. The cold hit him first. March in Toronto is its own particular kind of unpleasant. Not the clean cold of January, but a wet, grasping cold that gets into the collar and stays. Aldrich was wearing a good coat and still felt it. The girl, he thought, must be half frozen. He walked around the front of the car. She hadn't moved. She was still looking at the hoarding. Up close, he could see that her eyes were the color of creek water in autumn. Not brown, not green, something in between, and that she had a small cut above her left eyebrow that was healing badly, the kind of cut that needed a proper cleaning and hadn't gotten one. "Hey," he said. She looked at him. She didn't flinch, which surprised him. Most kids in that situation flinched. "Are you waiting for someone?" "No," she said. Her voice was steady. "Are you cold?" She considered this with what struck him as genuine seriousness, as though coldness were a question worth evaluating carefully. "A little," she said. "Where are you going?" A pause. "I'm figuring that out." Aldrich Voss had built his career on reading people quickly and accurately. He had sat across tables from men who wanted to take things from him, and men who wanted to give things to him, and men who wanted both at the same time. He knew what a lie looked like. He knew what hunger looked like. He knew what a person looked like when they were out of options and too proud to say so. This girl was 11 years old and out of options. "Come sit in the car," he said. "Just for a minute, it's warm." She looked at the car. She looked at him. She did not look afraid exactly, but she looked careful. He respected that. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said. "My name is Aldrich. My son is in that car. He's 16 and he's annoying, but he's harmless." Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "My name is Petra," she said, then stopped, as though she'd said the wrong thing. "I mean, people call me Pip." He registered the correction but didn't press it. "Pip," he said. "Okay. Do you want to sit in the car, Pip?" She looked at the hoarding one more time. Then she got in the car. Reed was not pleased. He communicated this through a series of pointed silences and the particular way he positioned his body against the opposite door, as though Pip might be contagious. Aldrich asked Henk to drive to the Tim Hortons on King and ordered hot chocolate and a breakfast sandwich, and Pip ate with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who wasn't sure when they'd eat next. She didn't bolt it. She just ate steadily, with care. Aldrich found that detail lodging somewhere in his chest. She didn't offer anything about herself until the sandwich was gone. Then she said, "That building you're putting up, on Adelaide, you know that lot? My mum used to take me there. There was a bakery." She said it matter-of-factly, but there was something underneath the matter-of-fact that Aldrich had learned in the bad years to hear. "Used to," he said. "She's been sick," Pip said. "She's been sick for a while. Where is she now?" Pip looked out the window. A long beat. "Somewhere she shouldn't be," she said, and Aldrich felt the hair on the back of his neck move in a way it hadn't in years. He dropped Reed at school. Reed did not say goodbye to Pip. Pip did not seem to notice, or if she did, she'd already filed it away in some internal system that had long ago categorized boys like Reed and moved on. "Where can I take you?" Aldrich asked. She named a shelter on Jarvis that Aldrich knew by reputation, one of the decent ones, run by a woman named Sister Marguerite, who had once been quoted in the Star saying that the system was broken and she'd stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. "All right," he said. Then, because something in him couldn't quite release the thread, "Will you be there later, if I want to come by?" Pip looked at him with those Creekwater eyes. "Why would you want to come by?" He didn't have an answer, not one he could articulate yet. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think I would." She seemed to weigh this then. "I'll be there until 6. Sister Marguerite makes us leave at 7 so she can reset the rooms." "Okay," Aldrich said. "I'll come at 5. She nodded as though they'd settled a business arrangement. Then she got out of the car, tucked her coat tighter against the March cold, and walked through the shelter doors without looking back. Aldrich sat in the car for a moment. Henk did not say anything. Henk was paid, among other things, not to say anything. "The Adelaide lot," Aldrich said. "There used to be a bakery, Delacroix Patisserie," Henk said. "Closed 2019. Owner died." Aldrich looked at the shelter doors. "Find out who owned it," he said. He did not go at 5. His 2 o'clock ran into his 3:30, and his 3:30 became an emergency call about a zoning variance in Mississauga that required him to speak to 3 people in quick succession, each of whom was more certain than the last that the problem was someone else's fault. By the time he looked at his watch, it was 6:15, and he felt something he hadn't expected. Genuine, specific disappointment. He went the next morning instead. Pip was in the common room doing homework on a table that wobbled. She looked up when he came in, assessed him for a moment, and then looked back at her work. "You're late," she said. "I'm sorry. You said 5. I know." Work ran over. He sat down across from her, uninvited. She did not object. "What are you working on, fractions?" A pause. "I hate fractions. Everyone hates fractions. My teacher says they're important." She said it with the tone of someone faithfully reporting testimony they found personally unconvincing. He smiled. It surprised him, the ease of it, the spontaneity. He hadn't smiled like that since before the bad years. "Your teacher's right," he said, "but you're allowed to hate them and still do them." Pip seemed to find this reasonable. She wrote something down. He watched her work and thought about what she'd said about her mother. Somewhere she shouldn't be, he'd had the owner of Delacroix Patisserie checked. A woman named Odette Lapierre, 68, retired to Quebec City after the death of her husband. The space had been sold to Voss Meridian's land acquisition team 18 months ago. Standard transaction. But the girl's mother hadn't been the bakery owner. She'd just taken her daughter there. That was a different thread. "Pip," he said carefully, "your mum. The place she is, you can't visit her." She kept writing. "I tried," she said. "They said I wasn't on the approved list." "Who's they?" She was quiet for a moment. "Whitmore Group," she said finally. "That's the name on the building." The name landed in Aldrich's chest like a stone into still water, and the ripples went everywhere at once, because the Whitmore Group wasn't a social services organization. The Whitmore Group was a private care network, and it was owned, at least in part, by his brother Clifford. He drove home that evening in a silence that even Henk didn't try to fill. He went into his study and closed the door, and stood in front of the window looking out over Rosedale. The bare March trees, the cars below, the distant glitter of the city that he had spent 30 years building himself into, and he thought about Serena. He had met Serena Marchetti in 2003 at a project gala in the distillery district when they were both young enough to stay out until 2 in the morning and wake up without consequences. She was a landscape architect with ink on her fingers and a laugh that made rooms rearrange themselves around it. They were married in 2006 in a small ceremony in Prince Edward County. Reed was born in 2008, and then, because this is where Aldrich's memory became compressed and careful, the way we compress things that are too large to hold in their full size. In 2017, Serena had begun showing signs. That was the word Clifford had used. Signs, erratic behavior, instability. She wasn't sleeping, wasn't eating. She was making decisions that worried people. She had quit her firm and was spending hours at the kitchen table writing things Aldrich couldn't quite follow. She had called Clifford at 2 a.m. once, just once, sobbing and incoherent. Clifford had been the one to suggest the facility. He had presented it as care. He had been, as he always was, entirely reasonable. What Aldrich had not known, what he was only beginning, now, standing at his study window to allow himself to examine, was that Serena had been trying to tell him something before she went. She had been trying to tell him about Clifford, about what Clifford had done years before in the arrangement of their father's estate, about what Clifford was still doing now with the firm's northern contracts, about the way Clifford smiled when he thought he wasn't being watched. Aldrich had told himself in the years since that Serena had simply been unwell, that the things she'd said about Clifford were a symptom, that he had done the right thing. He had told himself this because the alternative was something he could not live in. Now there was a girl named Pip who had found him by a construction hoarding that bore his company's name, and she had a mother in a Whitmore Group facility, and her eyes were the color of creek water in autumn. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer. It took 4 weeks to get the information. His lawyer, a careful and methodical woman named Sylvie Okafor, who had been with Voss Meridian for 11 years, and who did not ask questions she didn't need the answers to, traced the Whitmore Group through 3 holding companies before she found the Patient Records Division. What she found there required a second lawyer and a privacy commissioner inquiry and a conversation with a physician named Dr. Benoit, who had, it turned out, been troubled for some time. The patient's name was Marisol Vega. She was 38 years old. She was a former pastry chef who had worked at Delacroix Patisserie from 2013 until 2019 and who had been admitted to a Whitmore Group facility in the fall of 2020 under a diagnosis of acute psychotic disorder. The admitting paperwork had been signed by a Dr. Aldous. No, that name was in the list. A doctor. A signature. The paperwork had listed no next of kin. The daughter had not been listed. There was a name on the intake form, however, in the field for referring party, C. Voss, Clifford. Aldrich read the name and felt something in him go very, very still. Not anger. Something older than anger. The thing that comes when you have been waiting for a truth, and the truth arrives, and it is exactly as terrible as you suspected, and you have run out of reasons to look away. Marisol Vega had known something about Clifford. Sylvie had found it in the records, not the medical records, but the older ones, the ones that connected to the northern contracts Serena had been trying to tell him about. Marisol had been present at a meeting she shouldn't have attended. She had, according to the document trail, told someone what she'd seen. 6 weeks later, she had been admitted to a Whitmore facility. Her daughter had been listed as a dependent with Child and Family Services. Her daughter had been shuttled through 3 placements before aging out of the system's patients and ending up on a cold March morning, looking at a construction hoarding that bore the name of the man who, unknowingly, had been part of why she was there. Aldrich sat in his study until 2 a.m. He didn't sleep. He drank 1 glass of whiskey and then put the bottle away because he needed to think clearly. In the morning, he went back to the shelter on Jarvis. Pip was in the common room again. Same table, different homework. She looked up when he came in and something in her face shifted. She had begun, in the 4 weeks of his occasional visits, to look for him, and she hadn't quite decided yet how she felt about that. "I found your mum," he said. She put her pencil down. She did it slowly and precisely, as though the act of putting a pencil down required her full attention. Then she looked at him. "You found her," she said. "I know where she is, and I know why she's there." He sat down. "And I'm going to get her out." The Creekwater eyes, direct and deep and measuring. "Why?" she asked. It was the same question she'd asked him 4 weeks ago in the car, and he still didn't have a clean answer, but he had a truer one now. "Because someone I was supposed to protect was put somewhere she shouldn't have been," he said. "And because the same person did the same thing to your mother. And because I should have known years ago, and I didn't, and I have to do something about that." Pip watched him. She had the stillness of a child who has learned, through necessity, not to react to things too quickly, not to let hope get ahead of evidence. "What about my mum?" she said. "Is she?" She stopped. "She's alive," he said. "She's been over-medicated and under-monitored, and she deserves a great deal of competent care that she hasn't been getting. But she is alive, and she is, underneath everything they've given her, herself. The doctor who's been treating her, a man named Dr. Benoit, has agreed to testify." Pip picked up her pencil again. She turned it in her fingers. He could see her processing, not performing emotions, just actually processing in the way of someone who has had to manage their own interior states for a very long time without help. "Raid was horrible to me," she said. "When I was in the car. I know. I'm sorry. He didn't say anything mean. He just made me feel like I wasn't there." "Yes," Aldrich said. "He does that. He learned it from somewhere, and I have to figure out where and fix it." He paused. "He's coming with me when I go to see your mother. I think it'll be good for him." Pip looked up. "You're bringing him? He needs to see something that isn't his own life for a while." She considered this. "Then, that's actually a good idea." "Thank you," he said dryly. Something happened in her face then, something small and definite and entirely genuine. It wasn't a smile yet, but it was the room that a smile lives in, lit up and ready. The legal proceedings took 3 months. Sylvie Okafor was meticulous and relentless. The Privacy Commissioner's investigation expanded to include the northern contracts, which led to a provincial inquiry, which led to 3 of Clifford's business associates deciding, in rapid succession, that cooperation was in their best interest. Clifford's lawyer made sounds about defamation. Clifford himself called Aldrich twice. Aldrich did not answer. On a Wednesday in June, with the sun coming in sideways through the windows of a nondescript office building on University Avenue, Marisol Vega's wrongful confinement order was signed. Aldrich had arranged everything through proper channels: family reunification services, a transition plan, a medical team he had vetted personally. He did not go to the facility himself. He had been advised it would complicate things, and for once in his life he listened to advice. He stayed at the office and tried to read a variance report and failed entirely. His phone rang at 2:47 p.m. It was Pip. She had never called him before. She had his number. He'd given it to her weeks ago, but she'd never used it. "She remembers me," Pip said. Her voice was different, smaller, not younger but more permeable. The careful surfaces she usually kept up had gone thin, and he could hear straight through to the person underneath. "She called me by my real name. She said Petra, and then she said, 'I kept your picture.'" Aldrich closed the variance report. "That's good," he said. "That's very good, sweetheart." There was a silence on the line, not uncomfortable, the kind of silence that has something in it. "She had a picture in her room," Pip said. "They'd let her keep one picture, and it was me, from when I was like 4. I don't even remember that day. She kept it for 7 years," Aldrich said. "Yeah, a breath. She kept it." He could hear, in the background, a sound he couldn't quite identify. Soft, rhythmic, human. After a moment he realized it was Marisol humming, quiet and ragged and real. "I'll let you go," Aldrich said. "Okay." A pause. "Aldrich?" "Yes, Raid," she said. He did come. "To the facility, when my mum was being brought out." Another pause in which he could hear her deciding whether to say the rest. He helped her with the stairs. She couldn't do the last 2 steps on her own, and he just went over and helped her. He didn't make a thing of it. Aldrich was quiet. "I thought you'd want to know," Pip said. "Yes," he said. "I wanted to know that." Clifford Voss was charged in September. The Northern Contracts investigation became a matter of public record. Aldrich gave one interview, to a journalist he trusted, and said what needed to be said clearly and without embellishment. The system had been manipulated, real people had been harmed, and it should not have taken this long for anyone to look. The journalist asked him how he'd found out. "A girl on a sidewalk," he said, trying to memorize a building. He donated the Adelaide lot. Not the whole development, they still built, because jobs and housing and the practical work of cities doesn't pause for moral reckonings, but the ground floor, the intended retail units, was restructured as a community food hub. The woman who came to run it, once she was well enough, had spent years making pastry in the French tradition and had strong opinions about laminated dough that the volunteers found both demanding and instructive. Her name was Marisol. She had her daughter working the morning shift on Saturdays, though Pip made clear to everyone who would listen that she was only there for the croissants and not because she had any particular fondness for early mornings. Reed Voss showed up one Saturday in October unannounced. He stood in the doorway for a moment, looking like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands, which was, Aldrich had come to think, the most honest version of his son he'd ever seen. Pip handed him an apron without ceremony. He put it on. "Fractions," she said, handing him a recipe card. "What? You're going to halve this batch. Fractions." She said it with the tone of someone faithfully reporting testimony they no longer found personally unconvincing. Reed looked at the card. He looked at her. Something passed between them, not friendship yet, nothing that tidy, but the acknowledgement of two people who had each seen something in the other that couldn't be unseen. "I still don't know why my dad stopped the car," he said. Pip glanced toward the window, where the spring light was already thinking about becoming summer. "I think," she said, "he saw someone trying to figure out where they were going, and he recognized it." Reed thought about this, because he was doing the same thing. "Probably," she said. "Most people are." She handed him a bowl. He took it. Marisol in the back was humming again, that same quiet, ragged, real sound that had traveled down a phone line in June and arrived in Aldrich's chest like something returning from a very long way away. Some things, once lost, do not come back. That is true, and it is important, and it should not be minimized. But some things do.